Hello, everyone. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Wishing you all a Merry Christmas. I wanted to make a brief video for the occasion and discuss how we tend to romanticize Christmas, at least in my part of the world. We see this sometimes on the occasion of the hymn, Silent Night, Holy Night. All is calm, all is bright, everything is in heavenly peace. However, if you've ever been exposed to a scene of a birth, you realize that it's hardly calm, it's hardly silent, and it's hardly peaceful. There's a lot of things that one is exposed to by way of visibility, by way of sound, but we tend to dehumanize some of these elements because we tend to prefer something of a picturesque manger scene. We also observe this in the hymn Away in the Manger. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but no crying he makes. Jesus is such the perfect infant that he doesn't even cry. When, of course, life very much teaches us that there's not going to be any exception to this. The child is going to cry, but once again, we tend to make our scenes picturesque and very romanticized. We're always at a disadvantage in cross-cultural readings of the text. We're limited by space and time. Space is very different in my North American context. It's very different than the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern culture. That's the space. Time-wise, I live 2,000 years after the New Testament writings. And so even if I was to look at Mediterranean, Middle Eastern culture today, it's still not exactly the same as it was 2,000 years ago either. And so, as one scholar said, we tend to look in a well for Jesus, and what we see is a reflection of our own selves. We impose our own selves on the text. This picture here that I'm showing as the backdrop, that's perhaps one example of how we like to bring the text into our world, and nothing wrong with this picture. But of course, you have likely seen many of these images, as I have, of Jesus being nearly pale in complexion, blue eyes, brown hair, but with some blonde highlights. Yes, another example of how we bring our images into the text. Even there's linguistic barriers. Jesus likely did not speak Greek. He knew some Greek, I'm sure, but not widely. He probably knew Aramaic the best, some Hebrew as well. And so we've got writings in Greek of words that Jesus likely said mostly in Aramaic. And then it's translated into English 2,000 years later. Linguists know there's not always a neat and perfect harmony of words. And sometimes it can be challenging enough just to interpret the English in our Bibles. Here's an example of a cartoon. I hope it comes across well because it's somewhat faint. But here this child's appealing to his mother. Even Jesus lied. How do you know? Because it says in Luke, they saw the babe lying in a manger. And so, anyway, very briefly, in the next few minutes, want to discuss some of the underdeveloped aspects of the Bethlehem narrative. First one is going to be a little warm-up here, an easy one. The second one might be a little more of a struggle. Matthew chapter 1, Joseph has found out that Mary is pregnant. He is going to dissolve this contract. Now, one of the things that are less understood from this is that in this culture, in the male patriarchal culture, it was a very high crime of adultery. Joseph had a certain responsibility in this world, as it would seem, that if he did not dissolve this contract, he was giving a stamp of approval to what the perception would be that Mary had done, and beyond that, he would be aiding and abetting her in a crime, and therefore contributing and being a co-guilty of adultery and even the crime of prostitution. This is how it was often seen in that world. So Joseph's commitment to remain with her is something that is appreciated, but perhaps it may be even a little underappreciated, as it was a certain stigma that he had to combat during the course of his life. Now, the second example that I have about romanticizing Christmas comes from a well-known passage in Luke chapter 2. I'm going to concentrate on verse 7. They laid him in a manger. This is the NRSV, because there was no place for them in the inn. And if you're like me, you've heard your entire life since you were a child that there was no hotel space for Mary and Joseph. Goodness, there wasn't even any space that family had given them. They were really down and out at this point. However, there likely wouldn't have been any hotels in Bethlehem anyway. It was not a prominent city in terms of size. It always had a population of fewer than 200 people throughout its history. You don't put hotels there. But what you do end up having is a crunch of space. Now, this word for inn here, katilama, inn likely isn't the best English translation of this word. We go here to the BDAG resource, the Bauer-Danker Greek-English Lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature. We look at the entry of Catalina here, Catalima. It says the inn is possible in Luke 2. However, but in Luke 10, in the story of the Good Samaritan, when it's much more conscious that he's being put up in a place of public lodging, katalima is not the word that's used. Instead, it's this word here, panakian. And so, therefore, is best understood here as lodging or guest room. This isn't something that is new. This is something that those that study the Greek as well as cultural aspects have understood for some time, that there was no room for Jesus in the guest room. Now, it's important here as we go to this diagram of a first century Jewish house to understand what was at work here. This is pretty standard, as archaeology has informed us, of the construct of these Jewish homes. Here is the family room. The family would sleep here. But because hospitality was always to such a significant priority to these people, they would have a guest room, a katalima. But because of the occasion, this guest room has been fully utilized. Now, they also had, adjacent to their home, a stable, and they had mangers on the inside at the family room. Why? This is an agrarian culture. Their livestock is of extreme import. These are not pets. This is about their subsistence. This is about their survival. So you make sure that you bring your livestock into the protection of the village walls at night. You even let them stay in a location here that's built onto your home, because you don't want predators to get to your investment, nor do you want potential thieves to threaten them as well. This is protecting your assets in a bank. And so you would have your animals here at your house. You could bring them in to feed them. And so it's likely that Mary and Joseph, they were here in this home, and rather than having access to the guest room, they had access here to the stable and the manger area. Now, what does all of this mean? It's still very much and very telling and very intentional in the text that this was a peasant birth. This was a common birth. It was not the accolades of the empire or of the household of Herod and Jerusalem. This was peasant and common birth. And so while it may remove some of the romantic characteristics of Christmas, of everyone closing their doors and shutting Mary and Joseph out, it doesn't take away from the theological message that when God sent his Son into this world, that he didn't send him to the high and mighty. He didn't send him as a prince in a palace, but sent him in the most common of ways. All right. Hoping you all have a good Christmas. Take care.